Hey everybody, On the Run with Beards and Dunn is back after a little hiatus. We had to take a week off because, Beards, what the heck were you doing in Laramie, Wyoming?
Well, I was out in Laramie, Wyoming. The dean of the business college out there brought me out there to speak to all the incoming freshmen that are in the business, part of it. So I spoke to two different, a couple hundred kids, two different times out there, and even got a chance to go fly fishing one day. So that was a lot of fun. And so yeah,
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but the business schools. Dick, you and I had always talked about going into business. We decided that was probably not the best.
Well, yeah. Now, Don, let me back up a bit. It wasn't there to talk about being a successful business person. Trying to get these kids motivated, tell them life stories.
I know. I just
but Don, before we get into the show a little bit, hey, big congratulations to you and to, your wife, Karen. I know tomorrow is a big day for both of you because tomorrow's your last day, and then you're in retirement.
We are, yeah. Karen and I are making it official tomorrow. It's our last day of work, and then we're retiring. We actually sold our house last Saturday, and to a really nice couple that are so excited that they found our house and just fell in love with it. And so, yeah, it's been a whirlwind week here for us, wrapping things up at work. And we're going to relocate. We're going to go out to Western North Carolina. Our daughter, Callie, and her husband, Jonathan, just had our first granddaughter, Emily Hope. And so we're going to be full-time grandpa and grandma. Even though we've been grandpa and grandma for Landon for 16 years, that dude's like 6'2",
right,
175 now. And so I forgot what it's like to have a little baby grandchild. And so we're super
well done.
excited.
And listen,
but thanks for mentioning that.
You're going to be very well missed. I know it's been, 35-plus years as the cardiac rehab, and you've been director there at the hospital in New Bern for 11 years or so.
11,
and
yeah.
I tell you what, they're losing one heck of a good guy.
Oh.
I mean, because you are, I can't see anybody that could do a better job and is nice and try to work with everybody. So congratulations to you and Karen.
Thanks, bud. No, everybody's been just super about it. Yeah, it's bittersweet.
It is.
Sure. When you do something for a living that when you do something you love, you never have to go to work. You just go do what you enjoy doing. And I think I'm preaching to the choir there with you, Dick. I was giving Dick a hard time before we started recording that his work is most people's retirement.
Right.
Going fishing, taking people out fishing. And,
yeah.
And that's so cool. And so, yeah, we're going to be coming out to do some fishing.
Yeah,
with the Beards here pretty soon. Well, hey, let's get going here because, man, I have been anticipating this episode ever since we started doing these podcasts because, just to follow your career, both of our careers, through running and all the things it's meant to us and stuff. And so I actually put on our website yesterday or today, and it's on Facebook, is some photos of the Boston in '82. And I put in the introduction, I said, in 1978, Beards, you're just finishing up junior college.
Right.
And just happened to get the opportunity to come out to South Dakota State University, and that's when we got to meet.
Right.
And just had a great, time running and getting fired up about running. And here we are now, 4 years. I mean, that goes by in a blink of an eye. You're lining up at the Boston Marathon, facing the world record holder in the marathon, Alberto Salazar, on the biggest stage in marathoning world is Boston. And you had kind of had that ride, that PR. And so, I have some questions. We kind of talked about your training. You went to Heartbreak Hill, ran up and down it in the blizzard, and that was awesome. And then, you ran a 10K in Atlanta and won that. That had to really be a boost to your confidence.
It was, definitely.
So your training was coming around. You were healthy. All right, let's get into this. When did you leave to go to Boston?
Yeah, so I flew up from Atlanta on the Thursday before Boston. So a few days out.
Monday.
And people ask me this all the time. So Beards, what kind of appearance money did you get? I said, appearance money? I said, I didn't get a nickel. They go, well, what kind of prize money did you win? I go, prize money? There was no prize money back then. I said, the only thing I got that was given to me from the Boston Athletic Association, the BAA, who puts on the race, was a free entry. And the entries back then, if I remember right, were like either $8 or $10.
that was hundreds of dollars.
Right? Oh yeah. So done. I fly in there Thursday morning, and I'm in my hotel, at the Sheraton, I think is where they had me stand. And New Balance picked up all my tab for everything. So, the news out there doesn't come on until 11 o'clock at night. Mm-hmm. So I'm laying in bed half asleep, and I've got the television on, and I'm kind of half listening, and all of a sudden they're talking about some story, and all of a sudden they go, oh, we're going to Logan Airport. Alberto Salazar, his plane just landed and is coming off the plane. Well, that was back, you could have reporters right up at the gate, So all of a sudden my interest perks up. So I'm sitting up in bed now, and Alberto comes off the plane, and he's got all these mics in his face, and TV cameras. And a reporter says, so Alberto, why did you decide to run the Boston Marathon this year for the first time ever? He says, well, I looked at the field, and I knew there was nobody that could beat me. Oh, done. Man, I'm telling you, I shot up out of bed, and I had adrenaline coming out my ears. And I thought, son of a buck, that guy, he's the world record holder, and he'd never been beaten. But still, the marathon, like Bill Rogers, our good friend, has said many times, it's a race that can humble you pretty quickly.
Oh,
so
man.
I don't think I could fall asleep until about 3 o'clock in the morning after that.
I'm surprised you didn't get your stuff on and go out for a run or something
I felt
like
like
that.
it. I did. I felt like it. So I wake up the next morning. So we're, I did it like a 7-mile run, and then a little shake that afternoon, and then that was Friday. So then Saturday, I did a 5-mile run, and then Sunday I went out and did just a short 2 or 3 miles with all my sweats on and just jogged. And the reason I always wore my sweats that day before, I ran very slow, and I really just kind of a shakeout, and I just wanted to get a good, nice kind of a sweat going. Right. Without putting too much effort into it. And then I would come back, and the little bit of stretching I would do, I was a lot more limbered up at that point.
All right. I would also think, too, just wearing your sweats, your trainers, and the next day you're putting on your racing shoes and your singlet,
right.
And it's just like you go from one extreme, and, man, you must have had, your batteries are pretty fully charged. You had great training, a taper.
Yes.
And so now that's Sunday. And now I kind of forget, the marathon is Monday.
Right.
And it starts at what time?
At noon. But done. I need to back up a little bit. So by about Friday, all of a sudden, I went into my shell like a turtle hiding from a raccoon, And you know how I used to get. And I didn't want to talk to anybody. Even, my first wife, Mary, and she knew what to expect and stuff. I'd go down the back way, so, of the hotel, so people wouldn't see me. And sometimes I'd walk by people I knew without even noticing them, and Mary would be right behind me and say, it's okay, he's in that mode. And I didn't want to talk to anybody or anything like that. So Sunday afternoon, I get a knock on my door at the hotel, and I look through the little peephole, and I see I won't mention his name. It's this guy I know from another shoe company, an executive. And so I open it up, and he goes, Dick, listen, Greta Weitz and her husband Jack are upstairs in their room. They want to just wish you luck tomorrow and talk to you a little bit. And I knew Greta and Jack, and I just really didn't want to go. And I told him, I'm just kind of too focused right now. And anyhow, he finally convinced me. So I went up there and met with Jack and Greta Weitz, and they ran for a particular shoe company that this gentleman that knocked on my door worked for. And so they're basically filling me full of all this information on how great a shoe company it is and stuff like that. So I finally
they're trying to recruit you, it sounds like.
And,
all right.
And so the next day or later that day, I go back to the room then, and because Greta was running also. Well, about an hour or so later, a knock on the door, and this executive, it's him again. So I let him in, and I really didn't want to talk to him, but he goes, Dick, here's the deal. If you wear our shoes and a singlet tomorrow, I'll give you $25,000 right now. And he said, and I promise you, no matter how you do tomorrow in the race, we'll sign you to a long-term deal. Well, I tell you, when those words came out of his mouth, if I could have slammed that door in his face, I would have. I thought, how could you imagine, Dunn, New Balance, who took a chance with me when I was a nobody. If I had showed up the next morning or the next afternoon on the starting line wearing a different shoe company singlet and wearing their a different shoe company shoes, I mean, my name would have been dirt. So I basically kind of slammed the door on him. And now you got to remember, my contract I did have with New Balance at the time had run out on April 1st.
Oh, so you wouldn't have been in violation if you did it. They couldn't have sued you.
No, I wouldn't have been, and I wasn't worried about it. You know, my focus then was getting ready for the race, and we'll deal with everything after that. So, we went out to the north town of, Mary and I went out to the north end of Boston, had a real nice pasta, meal about 6 o'clock, came back and, was, back my routine at night was always having a bag of Fig Newton cookies next to the bed because, I was always hungry, and the Fig Newtons were, high in energy, and they seemed to go through me pretty well and everything. So I didn't sleep very good, obviously. I was up and down, drinking lots of water. And so finally I get up and about 7 o'clock in the morning. So I walk over to the window in the hotel room and I pull back the shades, hoping to see cloudy skies, a little bit of mist maybe, and a tailwind. Well, I pull back the drapes and there's nothing but blue sky, and I see this big orange ball coming up out of the eastern horizon. So I go back to the television and I turn on the Today Show. And people our age will know who this was, but Willard Scott was a long-time weather guy for them.
We all know who Willard Scott was if you're over a certain age.
Willard comes on to do the weather, and he goes, "It's going to be a great day in Boston for the marathon. Sunshine and 80 degrees."
Great day to watch the marathon.
Well, you look at Willard, you can tell he'd never run a marathon before. So I started drinking lots and lots of fluids. Well, at 7:15 done. Now, remember, the race doesn't start till noon. Here's where I think I made maybe a little bit of a mistake. I was, us as runners, we're all concerned about, having to stop halfway through the race and going to the bathroom or something,
Yeah.
And so here's what I had for breakfast. I had a slice and a half of dry toast and a cup of hot chocolate. That was it. So basically, and I'd eaten my big meal at 6 o'clock the night before. I kind of fasted for like 18 hours, So now you got to remember, this is back in the day when if you were an invited athlete, they didn't have a big bus to take you up to the start. You kind of had to get your way up there. So the New Balance guys, one of the guys that works for them, said, "Hey, Beards, we'll pick you up in the station wagon out in front at, I don't know what time it was, 10 o'clock in the morning or maybe 9:30, I think it was." And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay." So anyhow, I get, the morning of the race, I get out to the front of the hotel and I see the station wagon. Well, there's like 10 guys jammed in that station wagon. And the only place there is at all for me to ride is back in that very back part where you'd put your suitcases,
Right.
So I crawled through the back window.
The cargo
And I'm
area.
sitting in that little cubby spot back there. But part of me was thinking, oh, this is okay because I don't have to talk to any of these guys because I was still so focused. Well, we started heading to Hopkinton, and the back window wouldn't come up all the way. So, man, by the time I get to Hopkinton, I'm greening the gills because all the fumes were coming right back into me.
I know what that's like. Mark Mills and I, we when we were in college, we
No.
rode in the back. We always took station wagons, and we went out to Black Hill State University, and Jay Dirksen, none of us had been to Mount Rushmore. I was a farm kid. We couldn't go all the way out there to
Right.
see Mount Rushmore. We'd never seen it. Mike and Mark Bills had never seen it. And so Jay Dirksen drove us there. Mark and I sat in that back where you just described.
Yes.
And they had the window down because I don't think we had air conditioning.
Probably not.
And, oh, man. I remember Mark puked. When we got there, he was so gassed from the
I
exhaust.
felt like puking.
Anyway, so that's what. So kind of a two-edged sword. Nice to be back there by
Right.
yourself, but sucking down fumes.
Exactly.
All right.
So
All right.
now we get up to Hopkinton, and again, back then, they didn't have any place for the invited runners to go. You just had to hang it around. And so Coach Squires had gone up a few days earlier and just started knocking on people's doors to see if they had a room I could, maybe just camp out in until the start of the race. So the night before, Coach he says, Dickie, here's some directions on how to get to this lady's place, And so I get up to Hopkinton and I pull out this piece of paper. I think it was, again, a beer stained napkin from the Elliott Lounge. And so I'm looking at these directions, and he made little illustrations. And so I think, gosh, this looks like the house. I go up and I knock on the door, and this little old lady, she opens the door and she goes, "You must be Dick." I go, "Yes, ma'am, I am." So she brings me in and she closes the door, and there's a steep stairway going right up from the entrance. So she starts going up there, and she turns back and she takes my hand. And so she's leading me up these stairs. So we get to the very top, and she opens this door, and I started to walk through into there, and it's dark as can be. There's 2 candles and some of that smelly incense stuff blowing or burning. Yeah. So she walks in there with me, holding my hand. I get through the door, and she kind of kicks it shut. And my first thought is thinking, I'm dead. I'm never going to see the light of day again.
That or she had something else in mind, exactly. And we're not going to talk about that.
And so she goes, Dick, this was my son's room when he lived here, many years ago. And she goes, you can use the whole room, the bed, whatever you want. She goes, I left a pitcher of water over there for you and a glass. She goes, and she gives me a big hug and wishes me luck. And she walked out the door, and I said, thank you very much. And I never saw her again.
That's so cool.
But Don, I got to back up just a moment. So the night before the race, Coach knocks on my door, and I let him in. He goes, Dickie. And he had a paper New Balance painter's cap, which was, big back then. But you know me, I never wore a cap to run in, other than in the wintertime, He says, Dickie, take this New Balance cap, cut a bunch of holes in the top of it, and wear it. He said that white cap will reflect the sun a little bit. And he said, if anybody's handing ice out there, take that cap, put the ice in the cap, and then put it back on your head. Well, heck, who's going to argue with Coach? If he would have said, hey, before the start of the race, whack your head against a telephone pole 10 times, I would have done it. So anyhow, I'm drinking water like bad out of heck. At about 11:30, so a half hour before the start, I thought, I better go out and jog a little bit. So I leave this older lady's house, and I start jogging. And I'm thinking, and done. The water was swishing around in my stomach. But I thought, well, that's good. At least I'm well hydrated. So now I'm about 15 minutes till the start. So I start heading towards the finish line, and I all of a sudden, I panic. Now, back then, there were 7,000 runners that year, that was a lot of runners. But I'm at the very back, and I've got to get through 7,000 runners, and I'm thinking, oh, my God, I've been training for this race for 6 months, and now I might not even make it to the starting line in time. So I was wearing a New Balance shirt over my singlet, and I'm trying to fight through the crowd, and nobody, I go, I got to get to the front, and I'm lifting up my number. I go, I got number 3, and then somebody recognized me, and they go, it's Dick Beardsley. And Don, it was like the parting of the Red Sea with Moses. And all of a sudden, this lane opened up, and I got right to the front. And so now I'm standing on the front row, and man, I feel like a caged tiger. So the starter's standing off to the right, and they got this big, gosh dang rope all across that front line to hold us back. And of course, my thought is, oh my gosh, they better get that rope out of there. If they don't, I'm going to be the only one that wraps around like a python. You're going to
fall over the rope.
Right. Yeah. So the starter, he puts up his pistol, and he goes, 1 minute. And I look to my right, and I see Alberto Salazar. I look to my left, I see Bill Rogers. I see all these other world-class athletes, and I'm scared and nervous. When all of a sudden, Don, I feel a tap on my shoulder. And I look behind me, and about 2 rows back, but we're all bunched together,
right,
is, Barney Klecker.
Joe Klecker's
Joe
dad.
Klecker's dad. And Barney was at one time, for many years, the world record holder for the 50-miler. And Barney goes to me, he goes, Dick, did you double tie your shoes? I go, no, Barney, I never double tie my shoes. So I turned back around. We're like, 30 seconds from
30
the start.
seconds. Yeah.
He taps me on the shoulder again. Dick, you really need to double tie your shoes. And now I'm mad. Mad for me. And I turn and go, Barney, I don't double tie my shoes. And so I turned back. All of a sudden I thought, what the heck do I feel kind of down around my feet? And when I looked back, I was going to apologize to Barney, and he wasn't there. And I looked down, Barney's down on his knees, double tying my shoes.
I love that story. Do you ever, that is awesome. He was so concerned. He knew you were going to go out there and nail it, and I think he just didn't want any reason, any excuse.
And done.
To slow
You
down.
know what? Honest to gosh, ever since that race, I never ran another training run or a race without double tying my shoes.
It worked, dude.
So
that is great. All right.
Okay, are you ready for the start?
Yeah.
Okay, so pistol goes off, and Alberto just shoots out of there like a rocket, and I'm right along his left side. So we go through the first mile in 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and I'm hanging on for dear life. And, when you're hanging on for dear life and you still got 25.2 miles to go.
Now, Beards, I got to brag a little bit. I remember, boss, in the next year, I went through it 5 flat.
Yeah.
And I thought I was hauling butt.
You were.
But then you go, wait a minute. So 431 is just like off the charts. But all right, go ahead.
So, and I felt, I hit that first mile and I just felt terrible. But I thought, I just kind of set it aside and thought it's just some nerves. And I get to mile 2 and I felt worse and done. I hit mile 3, and I remember I felt so bad at that point that the first thought to cross my mind was to drop out. And I look back on that, how different my life would be today if I had, done that. We probably wouldn't be doing our show.
Who knows? When you say you felt so bad, was it just didn't feel in sync?
No, exactly.
Your breathing.
Everything done. Yeah, my breathing, my stride. My arms felt heavy. My legs felt heavy.
And you're 3 miles into
and
the
I'm
marathon.
3 miles in. But I thought, no, Dick, you can't drop out. You've worked too hard for this. So I get to mile 4. Well, I didn't feel any better, but I didn't feel any worse. And so that point was a huge confidence builder for me. Done. It took me by 5 miles. Finally, I started to get into that rhythm. My legs started feeling good and popping. My arms felt good. My breathing was down. And that day there was an estimated 1.5 million spectators lining the streets. And now, back then there was no crowd control. I mean, there was no fencing up or anything like that. And it's probably one of the first beautiful spring days they'd had in Boston. So the crowds were thick. So we're going along, and Coach Squire says, Dickie, I don't want you doing anything for the first half. You just sit in that pack, So I'm in this pack, and we were probably maybe 10, 12 of us, something like that. So I can't remember the name of the town, but we're going through a town by where Alberto grew up, and where he, lived most of his life. So we're coming through this little town, and there's people hanging out the windows. There's banners, people with signs, "Go Alberto, go Alberto." Well, we're running right next to each other, kind of leading this lead pack, And all of a sudden, Alberto's on my left, and all of a sudden I get a little shot in my ribs. And I look over at Alberto, and he kind of gives me this wry little look, and he turns to all the people on the left side and starts waving to them. And then he turns back to me and gives me this little smirky smile. I'm thinking, oh, that son of a gun, he's trying to mentally get on top of me. So I thought, okay, I got to even the playing field here. So I thought, what am I going to do? So just before we exit this little town, there's people on the right side, too, cheering for him and signs and banners. So I give Alberto a little shot in his ribs, and he looks over at me, and I start waving to all the people on the right side that were rooting for him. And I look back at Alberto, and he just kind of turned his head, and I thought, okay, now we're back to square one.
A little gamemanship going on.
Oh, yeah, a
here.
little gamemanship. So as each mile went by, I remember now it was down to about 6 or 8, and I remember we ran by this little lake that was out on our right, and there was a couple out there in a canoe. And I remember Bill Rogers turned to me and goes, Dick, man, sure would be a lot nicer to be out there pedaling that canoe than running down this hot street, wouldn't it? And I kind of chuckled a little bit, And Bill ran a heck of a race. He didn't like the hot weather and stuff, and And
didn't he admit to us that he had ran a marathon like 2 weeks earlier?
I can't remember what he said.
He told me that he ran Montreal, or he went for the money.
Oh, yeah.
And he kind of. I think he knew coming up against, I don't know, Alberto and you.
Well, and being a hot day too. And
yeah.
plus, Bill's 7.5 years older than me. So
when you were 26,
yeah,
he was in his
33 or
30s.
32
yeah,
or something,
his last big race, I think, was he won the Montreal Marathon in late '82, and yeah, and then those 2:11s and 2:12s started slipping away a little bit,
right?
And stuff. But anyway.
Anyhow, now remember back then there were no aid stations on the course. You just got water from spectators,
and you hope they were nice people.
Well, yeah. So done. I would run by somebody that was holding a cup out, and I'd grab a cup and I'd look at it, and if it looked like it was nice and clear, I'd drink it. If it looked a little iffy, I just poured it on my head, on my cap. So we're coming now down into Lower Newton Falls at about 15 and a half, 16 miles. Big downhill into this town. Well, Bill was a great downhill runner, and he takes off, and he put about 100 yards on me, Alberto, and Ed Mendoza.
Yeah.
There were 4 of us left in that lead group. So we come down, we get down the hill, and then people forget about this hill. When you climb out of Lower Newton Falls, it's a long grind all the way up to Commonwealth Avenue. Now, it's not real steep, but it's all uphill. And so halfway up that grind, we caught Bill and we dropped him. So now it's down to 3. So now we get to the 17-mile point. We're just getting ready to turn onto Commonwealth Avenue. And I looked at Alberto, and I thought, I was just kind of measuring everybody up. And I looked at Alberto, I'm thinking, gosh darn, he looks pretty good. And I looked over at Mendoza, and I'm thinking, man, he looks really good. And I felt okay. Well, we take that right-hand turn at 17 miles onto Commonwealth Avenue, and all of a sudden, Mendoza's gone. He drops out.
Yep.
So now it's down to the 2 of us. So I remember Coach Squires told me, he goes, Dickie, this is before the race. If you're in that lead group, when you hit the hills, I want you to run every one of them up as hard as you can, and on the downside even harder. Well, so like a good soldier listening to his commander, man, I hit the first hill and tried to shake Alberto, and I couldn't. Same with the second, same with the third. And now I'm at the base of the infamous Heartbreak Hill. And so I start going up that thing as hard as I can. And I remember I get about halfway up done, and I see this wheelchair athlete going up the hill. Now, you got to remember, we're talking 41 plus years ago. The wheelchairs the racers used back then, it looks like, they were a hospital wheelchair.
Exactly.
So I look ahead, and I see this guy about 40 yards up in front of me, and he's just pushing the best he can. I'm thinking, he misses one stroke, he's going back to the bottom of the hill. So he was off to the left side of the road. He so inspired me. I ran over onto his side. I patted him on the back and said, good job, buddy. And Alberto followed me right over. He didn't pat the guy on the back.
Well,
and then I ran back over to the right side.
Well, there's that video on YouTube called Duel in the Sun. It's about a 9-minute clip. And there's a shot of you doing that. And they don't, and the first few times I watched it, it's like, what?
It's hard to notice.
Yeah, well, you notice it and you go, what did Dick just do?
Yeah, right.
Did he smuck that guy in the back? No. But, I think that's pretty commendable. So now let me just kind of get in your head for a second. You were under control to the point where you're like, hey, that guy's out here working just as hard as I am. And he's, what an inspiration. Yeah, I can run. He can't, but he's still going to do the Boston Marathon anyway. I'm going to go over, because you could have just said, I'm not even going to acknowledge this person. I'm going to, but so you were feeling pretty good.
I was feeling good going through the hills, and seriously, Dunn, that guy so inspired me. Nice. And even the new wheelchairs now, it probably still would. But I'm looking at a guy going up pretty near mile-long Heartbreak Hill in a hospital wheelchair, and he's just working his tail off, and it inspired me. It really did.
And if anybody gets a chance, go to YouTube and type in Duel in the Sun, and it'll bring that 9-minute clip up. And just what you were talking about earlier, Beards, every shot, and they do a lot of, the technology isn't near what it is today.
No.
And the helicopter shots, you can barely pick you and Alberto out.
Right.
You had that white hat on. It truly
That helped.
You can see, and you're always ahead of Alberto, but the crowds, I am not kidding, 7, 8, 9, 10 people deep.
Crazy.
And the other thing, and you maybe didn't know it, I wonder how many bicyclists there
Oh.
were. I mean, nowadays, those guys would be drug out of there, thrown in the
Done.
Wushkow or
At
something.
one point, with a less than a mile to go,
Yeah.
I've seen this picture. There must have been 75 bicyclers.
Oh, at least. It was 50 to 100 easy.
Right. And
Yeah.
and John Lodwick, who finished third, about 3.5, 4 minutes back, if he would have been close enough to try to make a move, there's no way.
How we would have got through those bikers,
No.
I don't know. But
No.
And so, kind of going back to, nowadays we have goo and different,
Right.
concoctions. You had none of that.
None of that.
No orange slices.
Nothing.
No, the only fluid you got was if and did you say you had a few New Balance guys out there
So
that ended up a few
somewhere
bottles?
when I got into the hills twice, and Alberto and I were now together,
Right.
running. Everybody else was behind us. And I didn't know they were going to do this, but a couple of New Balance guys jumped out of the crowd and handed me a water bottle with
Nice.
water in it. And so I drank some, squirted some on my head, and then I offered it to Alberto. And of the 2 times I got a bottle, he took it one of the times and took a short little sip and then just kind of sprayed his head off too,
You shouldn't have done that, Dick. I'm just telling you right now.
Maybe that made the
I'm
difference at
teasing.
the end.
It might have made all the difference. Well, we don't want to give the end away.
No.
All right, so you're correct me if I'm wrong. Your top heartbreak hill.
Yes.
About 20. It's around 20,
Yeah.
20 and a half, something like that.
Yep.
And you guys are still together.
So I'm in the lead, but Alberto's right
In your
behind
bottom,
me.
yeah.
And because I get to the top and I'm running up that thing as hard as I can to try to shake him. And I get to the top and I looked over my shoulder and he's like right in my back pocket.
Right.
So you know what it's like down at, there's that nice gradual downside on the other side. And I remember Coach told me, he said, man, run those downhills as hard as you can. So honestly, Dunn, I felt like I was doing the 100-meter dash, trying to break away. And I remember getting back down to the bottom where it kind of flattened out. And I didn't even have to look back to see if Alberto was there. I could hear him breathing.
Yeah, he's right in
And
your
at
pocket.
that point, it was a little deflating, to be honest with you.
Sure.
And I couldn't feel my legs anymore. And the thought of having to run, 4.5, 5 more miles at the pace we were running, it was almost making me sick to my stomach.
Had you ever had that sensation before?
No.
I didn't think so.
No, never. And but here's what kind of kept me going is Alberto, the last way he wanted to run a race was sitting off of somebody's shoulder. He liked to be in control.
Right.
And I'd been in control now for the last 5 miles or better. And, in front and him right behind me. So I knew he probably was hurting a little bit too. And then, we didn't have the goos and stuff, but, I've told this story many times. The one thing we do have, as long as we can, are still above ground, is that wonderful stuff the good Lord gave us between our ears called the brain. And so now I'm starting to play brain games and mind games. I'm thinking, okay, I don't have any goo. I can't feel my legs. I don't know if I can run 5 more miles at this pace, but I know I can run 1 more mile. So my brain just kind of kicked me out of that mode of having to run 5 more miles, and all I had to do was run 1 more mile. So done. Now all of a sudden, the task at hand, it didn't seem so difficult.
How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Right. And so
Okay.
that's what I did. So I get to mile 22, and I still got that lead in 23 and in 24 and well, somewhere between 23 and 24, there's this big shadow comes over us, and there's not a cloud in the sky. Well, here the press bus couldn't get through to the finish at the top of Heartbreak because the crowds were so big, so they came barreling right down the road, and it actually brushed my right shoulder. And I remember as it went by, I took my right fist and I just smashed it into the side of the bus, and it went up a little uphill. And when it downshifted, this blue flume of smoke and oil came back into Alberto's and I's face. So that goes by, and I don't know, within the next half mile or so, all of a sudden, this guy in a black trench coat, he runs out onto the course, and he grabs my shorts, and he had a handful of dollar bills, and he's tried stuffing them in my shorts.
It's on the video.
Yeah, and so I kind of whacked him or tried to, and then he tried stuffing them in Alberto's pants.
And nobody ever figured out what this dude was up to, was he?
No.
It's like a protest.
I don't know,
I don't know.
what it was. And so now we're down to where it's a mile to go, because it says it right on there. You're at 25.2 miles, 1 mile to go, and the crowd. So done.
Oh, yeah.
The crowd the last 3-4 miles, they were so loud that what hurt most on my body was not my feet, my legs, arms. It was my ears. They were just ringing with the noise. I can't even describe what it was like. They were going crazy because with about 4 or 5 miles to go, people are listening on their transistor radios, down the course, and they're hearing this race about these two young American boys duking it out from the get-go. And so I really kind of noticed that about the last 4 miles or so, they weren't just cheering for Alberto. They weren't just cheering for me. They were actually kind of cheering for both of us.
Yeah,
because it was such an exciting race. So now
the
we're
video,
down.
The video shows that, and the crowd is just so thick. And, when you watch this video, I get emotional every time.
I do too.
I watched it a couple hundred times. And it shows the clock, and it says 2:03. And I'm thinking, Jesus, Beardsley is still leading. And I know I know what your finishing time's going to be. And I'm thinking, it's within a mile of the finish now.
Right.
And the crowd's going nuts. And then the video they kind of break away.
Yes.
The camera on this lead vehicle had to get to the finish, I guess. And they start kind of pulling away, and you don't really get a good view of it, but you can tell what happened.
Yeah, so with about 900 meters or so to go, I had maybe an arm or 2 arm length lead.
Right.
And I knew Alberto didn't have a great finishing kick, but I knew he had a lot better one than I had. So I thought, man, Richard, you have nothing left, but you got something left. You got to. And so I remember pushing out with my right leg to try to get one last hard surge to break open that gap, and done. I got the biggest gosh dang Charlie horse in my right hamstring. You could see it, bulging out almost through my skin. I mean, I remember it sent me right up in the air, and Alberto went flying by me like I was standing still. So done. I went from one moment thinking I'm going to win this 1982 Boston Marathon to now all of a sudden, am I going to even finish? Done. I thought I was having a bad nightmare. Honest to gosh, I thought I was in the movie theater watching The Exorcist again.
On the video, it shows it. You're in the lead, and the next thing, you guys kind of get lost in the crowd with the motorcycles, and then it's kind of, and Alberto's like, I don't know, 30 yards ahead of you, and pulling away, and then they go to an overhead shot. And you can see Alberto, leaving you because you got your hat on.
Right.
And we're talking 800 meters to go, and they go, oh, Alberto Salazar has just made his move.
Right.
And
He didn't make no move. I hit that gosh dang pothole. So I'm running along the right hand side, trying to work the crap out the best I can as far as to run. Well, the crowd moved back to let me come by, and my right foot come down into a pothole I didn't see. And I hit that pothole, and it just kind of jerked my leg. I pretty near tipped over, but it popped the knot out. So I got my stride back, and I remember looking behind me. That's when I saw the bicyclers right behind me. Yeah. And I looked back up ahead, and I could see the 7, 8 motorcycle state troopers surrounding Alberto, and I thought, if I get second and give it my best shot, I can hold my head up, but if I don't give it everything I got, I'm going to regret it. And done honestly, I started pumping my arms and lifting my legs, and the good Lord must have wanted to see an exciting finish because I had never had a gear at that point ever in a race, and especially at the end of a race in a marathon. And I'll never forget this. So we take a right-hand turn off of Commonwealth Avenue onto Hereford. And when you watch the video, this is, to me, Bob
who's
LaBelle,
the guy doing the call? Okay.
Bob LaBelle, he takes over the call, and he goes, Alberto Salazar, presumably is going to win
Got
the
the-
1982
yeah.
Boston
Got
Marathon.
the race in his pocket.
As he's outdueled Dick Beardsley. Well, about that time, here I come around the corner.
Right.
But then all of a sudden he goes, but watch Beardsley. He's making a move, but the motorcycle's got to get out of the way.
And Catherine Switzer and Coach Squires are on with him as color commentators. They've kind of lost it. You know,
Right.
Their composure as professional reporters.
Coach almost fell off the building, I was told.
And Catherine Switzer is like, oh my gosh. I mean,
Yeah.
she's just freaking out because you know, and Beers, I'm not bragging, I've ran like 11 marathons. And
Right.
trust me, when somebody drops you at the end of a marathon, I
Oh.
don't think anybody ever comes back
No.
from that unless the guy ahead of you, falls off.
Right.
And so when you were coming back on Alberto, and I just remember he looked back.
Yes.
And I wish I could have seen the look on his
Oh,
face.
and I was flying done.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
so-
and you come into that last left-hand turn.
Well, so we get up to the top of the hill, and we had to make one last left-hand turn. Now, back then, you finished right out front of the Prudential Insurance Building, and then when John Hancock became the sponsor in the mid-'90s or something, or '80s, whenever it was, they moved the start up and the finish line back. So when you made that last left-hand corner, it was about 150 yards to the finish
200
line.
at the most.
At the most.
Yeah, at the most.
So
yeah.
I remember, I had to. The motorcycles didn't know I was back in the race, so a couple of them kind of moved off to the right. Well, I tell you, Dunn, I've never, you know me, I've never ever used that as an excuse or anything like that. I tell you, the next morning in the Boston Globe, there were some articles that said I had tire tracks on my back. Like,
They didn't help you, that's for
No,
sure.
no.
And it did impede your progress because you were just coming up on Alberto's shoulder and you
Yes.
had to take that extra step out
right.
off to the right.
If I could have, if they
I
wouldn't
know.
have been there, because I was flying, and I could have made that sharp left turn right.
I would have you would have taken the inside corner.
I probably. And,
I don't know.
And so, I had to kind of go out around the motorbikes a little bit, and I got around them without any problem. And I'm just about catching back up to Alberto. And I remember thinking, here's where I think I made a mistake. So I'd worked so hard to catch back up to him, and I thought, okay, once you get even with him, just
Relax.
relax just for a moment, catch your breath, and then start sprinting. And as soon as I got up to his side, bam, he went right into that gosh dang, finishing sprint that he's used to in track. And by the time I responded, I just ran out of room. And I remember coming across the finish line. Alberto won, ran 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 51 seconds. I ran 2 hours, 8 minutes, and 52.6 seconds, which they, of course, round up to 2:08:53.
Right.
And done. I remember, well, first off, if that race would have been another 200 yards, I don't know if either Alberto or I would have finished, honestly. And if there had not been volunteers in the finish line, we would have both been laying on the ground. But done. So I come across the finish line, and I look up, and I can still see the clock reading 2:08 and change. And I'm thinking, I've never been so excited about anything in my life, half of me, and the other half had never been so disappointed. I'm thinking, I just ran a 2:08 marathon, but I got second.
It's the first time in history it ever happened that two
Right.
runners broke 2:09 in the same race. And I remember Coach Squires was losing it. He was trying to do the math in his head. He goes, I think
Yeah.
this makes Dickie
Number two ever.
Yeah, number two. It was number 4 ever.
Right.
Or something like that. And he was, everybody that was involved in that. Beards, I got to tell you, my only thing I'm going to mention is I was at Athletic Attic. I had to work at Monday. It was
Right.
a holiday in South Dakota. And we didn't have live, they didn't show the Boston Marathon
Sure.
on network TV on a afternoon on a Monday in the U.S. or anywhere,
Right.
as far as I know. But my boss, Neil Graff, was a former pro football player. And so he was an outstanding athlete. And so he had a lot of connections in the news media because they interviewed him all the time.
Right.
And so he and his wife knew of some sports guys, newscasters like over at Kello or KSFY,
Yeah.
the local ABC, NBC affiliate or whatever. And we were working at Athletic Attic Day going, man, Beards is running the Boston Marathon right now. I wonder how he's doing. And Peggy goes, I'm going to call over to Kello and see. And she calls over there and she goes, hey, do you guys happen to get any feed from Boston? And the guy goes, yeah, we're sitting here watching it right now. And she goes, really, what's going on? He goes, oh, it's coming down to the last mile. It's Beardsley and Salazar. She goes,
okay, done. You're giving me goosebumps right now.
I'm going to start crying. And I go, what? And she goes, it's Beardsley and Salazar. They're the only two left. And I'm going, oh, my God. It's gonna, you're going to get first or second. And she goes, they're coming around the last corner, and they're even.
Oh, my gosh.
And I'm thinking, and I started yelling. I'm not shitting. I said, Dick is the best downhill runner I've ever seen in my life. I always said you can't have like swivel hips.
Right.
You're like a race walker. I don't know how you do it, but your hips just kind of rotate or something like that. I go, Beards has got it. He'll win. She goes, Salazar first, Beardsley second, 2:08:50. And I just sat there. I was exhausted.
Right.
And I tell you, the rest of the afternoon was a blur. I really don't remember. But we were so excited to get that result live.
Yeah.
Because we would have sat there just waiting.
Oh,
Beers, I got to take a break here, bud.
Oh,
I'm sweating. I got to go take a shower.
I'm worn out, but done. Now, listen. A lot of things happened right after that race. Next week, we're going to get into that.
I was going to say, we're going to finish with the finish line. And if you go to the website, Beards and Dun Pod, I've got some photos, and there's some great photos off. You can go, Google it, Google Boston 82, Dick Beardsley, and you'll see tons of photos. And I grabbed a bunch, and it shows some finish line shots. It shows you and Alberto post-finish line. We'll end up with this one. I think one of the most epic photos I've ever seen is you and Alberto on the podium. Him, they're raising his hand in victory, and he grabs yours and raises yours up, and
on the podium with them.
Yeah, and the guy that's signing off on that YouTube video goes, "Geez, I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before." And I don't think they've ever seen it before.
I'll
since.
Never, ever forget that. That's the one and only time a champion had ever done that, and since even.
I think it was just mutual respect, and I don't know. We'll have to.
But we'll get into that next week.
We will.
So,
thanks, bud.
Oh, and we want to thank everybody.
I'm going out for a bike ride.
Oh, well, we want to thank everybody for listening. If you have any questions for Dunn and myself or comments about the show, you can please contact us directly on our website, beardsanddunpod.com, or leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, now known as X, all at Beards and Dun Pod.
Of course, if you're on YouTube watching this, hit the subscribe. Put a comment in there. We'd love to hear what you think of the podcast, and if you have any questions or anything. And Beards, I cannot wait till we hear about post Boston finish line.
I can't either.
Great stories.
It's good. There's some great stories. And Done. Happy retirement there, buddy.
Thanks,
we'll talk to you next week.
Catch you soon. Bye bye.
All right. Bye bye.